You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds, the owner of Summit Properties Northwest and Reynolds Decline Appraisal. And today I am also your host of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. And we are doing a special daily podcast while the social isolation concept continues. We are committed to doing a 5-day-a-week podcast until things kind of change. We figure that this is a great way to get our content out and to get some information to people kind of wondering what's going on as people are working at home or are not working at home, is the case for a lot of people. So let's jump right on into it and check out our first 2 episodes. Those would have been released, I think, either last night or today, something like that. But check out our previous podcast as well. So I'm going to jump right in here and just kind of catch up on what happened last night and what happened this morning. Earlier, we were watching the president's address on the $1 trillion stimulus package, and I'll get into that. But that is kind of a big component of what's going on. And what I'm doing with these daily podcasts is just kind of updating people on where things are and then where I think they're headed, and kind of give my take on, if you're in real estate, if you're local here in Seattle, what's going to happen. And then also following national trends across the U.S. and also international, because this is a worldwide virus. It's spread super quickly due to travel. So the first story is, of course, the Trump administration is requesting $500 billion for direct payments to Americans as part of the $1 trillion package. And most of the special meeting this morning that President Trump had was kind of addressing some of the really difficult questions, like, we know $150 billion, I think, is going to get sent, is going to be $50 billion is secured loans for the airline industry, and another $150 billion for secured loans or government loans to other parts of the economy impacted by what's going on. And that's a really tricky thing to do, is to try and pump money into an economy that's basically stalled out. And I've read reports that anywhere as our unemployment right now is somewhere around maybe as high as 20%. I think it's higher than that if you really drill down. But there are so many service jobs, restaurant jobs, bar jobs, tourism. The list just goes on and on and on that have been impacted by this, that it's a massive financial consideration, and coming up with a game plan to make all of that work it's not going to happen. We're going to get something, whether it's $1,000 to every American, who knows, but is that really going to work things out? I don't think so. My main takeaway is that we need to have leadership that kind of stands up and says, hey, here is what we are doing. This is the game plan. Let's roll forward with that, because that's what a good leader does. And that's a lot of what we haven't been seeing. But this is a super difficult kind of moving target with the virus and trying to figure out what's going on. So making those really hardcore decisions, that's a tough job. So any of the government leaders out there, I mean, this is a brutal time to try and be picking your battles on what's going on. So we're kind of working through that $1 trillion plan. At the same time, there's all these other factors going on that I'm kind of like, while you're working on that $1 trillion, bailout plan, there's all these other things that aren't necessarily getting top priority. Like, what about the ventilators to all of the healthcare workers that are trying to work in hospital scenarios? They don't have the equipment to basically do their job, and they are working 24/7 right now to try and do the testing, and they're around the virus all the time. So you've got all these factors going on of, hey, what about this? What about that? There's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of balls dropped as part of this, and a lot of collateral damage. Another interesting thing overnight is the U.S. and Canada agreed to close off the border to non-essential traffic. They're still basically going to let trade happen. So goods and services that are essential, those will keep going on. And another major worldwide thing is the worldwide leaders and have agreed to a vast amount of spending. And I know those are the leaders of like Italy, Germany, France, Spain. They're all basically, everybody's going to have to kick in on this one, because the financial repercussions, because it's such a global event, that we're going to see some big governments kick in some super big money. Another major thing here nationally was New York is proposing a shelter in place just like about 7 million people in the San Francisco area are experiencing right now. Basically a shutdown, stay at home, only go out for emergencies, medication, for food, but don't hang out with other people. That's what New York is looking at, and I think as of last night, that would be decided in the next 48 hours. I just want to see, let's make a call on all this stuff and let's run with it and have that be on a worldwide basis. I know that's impossible to do, but we've sent men to the moon. You'd be able to think we'd be able to figure out answers to some pandemic disease questions, because everybody always talks about it. I mean, how many bad Hollywood movies are there where a pandemic takes out the population, or there's one guy left at the end and he's going to come up with the virus and he's somehow going to get it miraculously out to the billions of people in the world and they're going to be saved. So we know that a pandemic virus is a reality, and yet we just don't seem to do anything. And much of what we've seen is just a bungling of how things have been handled. And a lot of people have said, hey, this is a major issue, including Bill Gates. I think he came out in 2016 and basically said, if there's a pandemic that comes around, guess what? We are not prepared. And yep, to 2020, we are not prepared. So here we are, just kind of working our way through. Wall Street has plunged just incredibly. I can't remember the last stat I saw about how many days it's dropped, just some major figures, but it's huge. I know this morning it was down, I want to say 7%. It was dipped below under 20,000. So as you can see behind me here, the stock market is down. The Dow is down close to 1,700 points. We are under 20,000. That is not a good thing. It's a terrible thing. It means a lot of people, if they sell right now, are going to lose a lot of money. But this has been a trend that's been ongoing since the beginning of the coronavirus. The uncertainty of how this is all going to be handled, and a lot of this has to do with world leaders, is that uncertainty is what's causing this massive drive down. If we had a game plan and just put the game plan in place and did it, I think you'd see a big turnaround of things. But until we get there, until we kind of sort through a lot of this stuff, we don't seem to be having a lot of direction as far as where things are headed and timelines of how long this is going to take. The virus is disrupting the U.S. troop withdrawal in Afghanistan. Just can't get guys out. And nobody wants to have incoming passengers from an international flight to any of their countries. I know there was a cruise ship that just recently, I think it landed yesterday in Cuba. They had been floating around trying to find a country that would take them, and Cuba took them, as so many of the Caribbean countries would not take them because they're isolated and they don't want the virus coming in, and for their probably difficult healthcare systems. A lot of countries don't have the healthcare that the U.S. or the major developed countries have, and so they don't want to be overwhelmed. And on that, America's hospitals are dangerously low on ventilators. I kind of mentioned that earlier. But in one of the news conferences yesterday, President Trump indicated to the governors, hey, go ahead and see if you can figure out how to get your own ventilators, because it's so much easier for a governor to go direct to suppliers than to involve the federal government, because anything with the federal government just becomes kind of a train wreck as far as actually getting your stuff. So that's kind of what's happening on a macro level, on a big news level. Things that happened here locally is that Governor Inslee in the state of Washington, he signed an emergency aid bill as the number of cases in Washington passed 1,000. So I kind of want to go through the cases. The cases are going up exponentially, as a lot of the experts figured with the coronavirus. It has this ramp up effect, and we are at that point where it's almost going up vertically. And that is cases, and then also the number died, I don't think is going up as quickly, a number of people who have passed away from the coronavirus, but that is expanding as well too, as the number of cases that are tested goes up. I was reading a really interesting thing about the testing in Italy, and I think they have around 2,500 deaths, and almost the stat was huge at how many of those people were over the age of 80 and had huge respiratory problems. So the number of people that the article I was reading in Italy that have died that didn't have major respiratory problems is two people. I don't know if that article is complete nonsense, but it was written by a pretty established author as far as I could tell. I did a quick Google search. And so a lot of this stuff is based on numbers of people who are already failing. Yep, when they get the virus, they are dying. But this isn't impacting the regular population at all. I know there's people who have said, but there are people in their 40s that are getting ill, and there have been people in their 40s that have died. And when you really start to dive into it and take a look, those people are really unhealthy. And another one of the big concerns that's coming up is as the virus sweeps through the population of the U.S., it's going to hit some populations that are really obese. And that is another major trigger that it's like if you have respiratory problems, or if you are obese, or if you are really unhealthy in any certain way, this could have a major impact on you. But for the rest of the population that is healthy and is younger, it just doesn't seem to be having that risk to the population. So the question I had, and I was talking with my good friend Dan Flitch, who owns 2 bars that are closed down right now, bar and grills. So this part of the podcast is going to be sponsored by the Savage Moose in Kenmore. They are still open for takeout, and I encourage you to frequent my friend Dan Flitch's bar, the Savage Moose in Kenmore, Washington. It's open for business, but just barely, because takeout isn't a huge part of most restaurant industry's business. It's a small part, but right now for a lot of small businesses, they are doing whatever they can to stay in business, because so much inventory and so much overhead is still being paid out right now. I was talking with Dan, and he's saying his goes into the thousands every single day, and he has no income coming in. So that is not, in business terms, that is not a winner. It is something that's very difficult to handle. And as a small business owner of 2 small businesses, your overhead keeps going. You don't have, just because you're not bringing in any income doesn't mean your overhead goes away. You've still got payroll, you've still got taxes. Payroll for a lot of companies is gone because those employees are gone. They are, they're filing unemployment, or they're taking a furlough, or whatever they can do to make ends meet. And this is going to have a massive impact on things. But for the number of dead, from the number of people dead and the number of people who actually have this virus, even if it goes up exponentially, this is a big reaction to the actual numbers, in my opinion. Yeah, there's a lot of people getting sick, and yeah, this will tax the healthcare system, right? But to shut everything down, and I understand we're trying to flatten that curve of cases, but to do these broad strokes, I don't know. Make it across the board for everybody. Shut everything down for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, but just do it. The issue that I've been having is that there's no uniform, and there's nobody at the top saying this is what we're doing, this is the game plan, this is what we're riding with. So you've got President Trump saying, well, let's not do any more than 10 people. The governor of Washington, well, don't do anything more than 50 people, but we suggest you stay at home. These are all like recommendations. And then there's like some stiff recommendations going on as well. What does that really mean? And in talking with my buddy Dan, we were saying yesterday, what if he did run his restaurant? Who's going to tell him not to? And we were kind of talking that one through, and he's like, the public outcry, the backlash to his bar would be so great if he still continued to operate that it's just not worth it. And so everybody's just kind of shutting down in the meantime. And yeah, is it curbing the virus? I'm sure it is. I mean, sure, this is going to work. It's an isolation exercise. But is it in relation, the massive amount of shutdown that we're going to, is it in relation to the risk? I don't think so. On that part, I don't think so. But that's outside of my control. And again, I'm just a real estate guy and a small business owner. I don't really know a lot about this stuff, but I do see what's happening on a daily basis. And it makes me think this is a massive overreaction. is kind of my opinion. And I know a lot of people will say, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Maybe I don't, but this is my opinion, and that's all my podcast is my opinion. I'm not holding myself out as a health expert. So the cases of death in the state of Washington, we reached 52, and the number of confirmed cases that we know about hit 1,012, and that was as of like 7:30 this morning. I've been kind of getting up early and gathering news that's gone on overnight. And the new restrictions at restaurants that went into place yesterday, those caused another run on stores, grocery stores, toilet paper, you name it. And that happened here locally in the state of Washington. So another fun day for people at Costco. What a drag. That's super difficult. I know Costco is hiring. I know QFC was hiring, another grocery store, the chain that's here locally, because they are trying to keep up with the demand for all the products that people are hoarding. And that is essentially what's going on. You've got a bunch of people hoarding because they're freaked out. You've got this whole mental thing going on where people don't know where the end is going to be. Nobody's said, hey, we're probably going to do this for a month and then taper. We've just got all of these things going on that are different. Something locally here that happened yesterday is that the Northwest Multiple Listing Service basically said don't hold open houses. They didn't really come out and say don't hold open houses. They said you're no longer going to have access to the open house function within the MLS. So essentially they're saying don't hold open houses. And that makes total sense. As the owner of a real estate brokerage with over 100 brokers, I think we've got 102, something like that right now. Open houses are an integral part of what we do. But in a case like this, I agree. Don't hold open houses, and here's why. Open houses are designed to create leads for the broker that is holding them open. They're not necessarily there to sell the house. There's a million things you can do in today's economy, especially in today's real estate market, that don't require you to physically be around other people. And so those are some of the things that we're working through right now is, hey, don't hold an open house. But you can go and look at a vacant house. You can let buyers into a vacant house. And you can let buyers into an occupied home if nobody else is home. Just try and minimize the exposure you have to people, and don't touch things. Don't run your hands over things. Just be smart about it. And then wash after you leave the home. There's still a lot of real estate transactions being put together. I think I reviewed maybe 3 Summit transactions between yesterday and today that came across my desk. And I'm like, yeah, the business is still happening. And on the appraisal side, on Reynolds and Klein side, we're super busy because interest rates are so low, and that typically happens in our industry when things are kind of going sideways with the economy, which is what's happening right now. But we've also had a period of super low interest rates that are being they're being driven down even further by the Fed reducing the federal funds rate. And that does not, again, I think I talked in yesterday's podcast or maybe Monday's podcast, it's kind of all becoming a blur, and I think it'll probably get worse before it gets better for me. But I have talked about the fact that the federal funds rate was reduced to anywhere between 0 and I think 0.25% by the Federal Reserve, and that was over the weekend, an emergency cut. That does not translate to mortgage rates. It translates somewhat to consumer loans. There should be a trickle down to consumer loans and mortgage rates. I don't know what they've done, but I am planning on a podcast with Dan Chapman from Fairway Independent Mortgage to kind of go over what's going on with mortgage rates in this time of uncertainty, because there's so many things that are just like, wow, we don't really know what's going on. And so many people are in the midst of trying to buy a home or do a refinance. And should they relock their rates? What should they do? Tune into tomorrow's podcast. We're going to be going over all that. So that'll be an interesting one. So one of the more positive things that I saw out there was health officials administered a trial vaccine for the coronavirus to patients Monday at Kaiser Permanente Research Facility in Washington State. So that's going on here. I watched an interview with a gal who was one of the people that was undergoing the trial, and she was happy to help. They're basically just administering a vaccine, and they'll have to put it to, I'm sure, a ton of people before they can figure out, hey, what works and what doesn't work. Casinos have closed. Those are not on federal land, but they are closing to comply with the state enactments that are going on. And 30 deaths in King County were linked to the Life Care Center, and that's the nursing facility in Kirkland, and federal authorities are investigating. That one to me is like, all right, you've got a whole bunch of people dying, but that was the epicenter. They got infected. Do we really need to have federal authorities investigating? I don't know. People died. They got the virus. They died. Sounds kind of hardcore, but that's a lot of what's going on is people are getting infected, they're living, and then older people and people who are unhealthy, who are already at risk, those are the ones that need to be super careful and worry about the impact to their life. In the state of Washington, we're looking at the unemployment. A lot of people are jumping on the unemployment bus. I think Monday there was a 1,025% surge, or maybe it was yesterday, Tuesday, a massive surge in unemployment in the state of Washington. And that's because so many people have basically been laid off for an unknown amount of time. And that's the scary thing. State of Washington does have a $4.7 billion unemployment trust fund. That is going to get tested throughout this time period because we don't really know how long this is going to go on, how long this is going to impact the economy. It's going to impact the economy one way or the other for a long time, but certain segments of the economy will come back. And one of the things I've been telling people here in Seattle is you've still got a lot of demand for housing. That demand is out there. Buyers don't necessarily feel 100% comfortable right now, but there are still buyers out there looking because they realize that now is a time where you can probably actually get a home and not compete with a ton of other buyers. And sellers realize that they can still get top dollar even in this market. There are so few properties on the market, and across the United States, there's so few properties on the market that if you put your home on the market, there's a super high probability that it's going to sell, and it's going to sell quickly if you've priced it correctly. So that's what I'm advising people. If you still want to put your house on the market, do it. Go for it. Now, you're going to have to do some creative marketing because you don't want to have a ton of people coming through your home, or most people don't. If your house is vacant, hey, put a key box on there and let her rip. That's my advice. But that can't happen with a lot of homes. People don't necessarily have another place to go to before they sell that one to take the proceeds to buy the next house. So what can you do? Well, at Summit Properties, we do a listing video for every single one of our listings. So we do a walkthrough, and that's with a DSLR, and we take images of every room. By the end of the time our videographer leaves a home, he's got enough footage to put together a 2 to 3 minute really cool video. And that's one thing that Summit has done, and that's why we've been able to succeed in a lot of areas, and our marketing still continues. We've still got our videographer going out to look at homes. He's just got to be careful, and he's taking video because business is still going on. So if you're in business and you're able to operate in today's environment, you can do some creative things and still get things done. That's like the reason you're watching this or listening to this podcast right now is one thing that we've kind of committed to is doing a daily podcast. Now, we've had some bumps in getting this thing out, but we're kind of working through what that looks like as far as coordinating with a team of 4 guys to put this podcast out, and everybody has different assignments, and it doesn't always happen super smooth because you're basically kind of starting things from scratch in a different environment. A lot of the workforce issues I'm hearing about out there with people working remotely are trying to figure out what their game plan is. All right, people are going to work on this, this, and this during this time of day. They'll get back together. They'll do a Skype meeting. They'll do a Zoom meeting, kind of reconvene, because so much stuff in business has to rely upon a team of people, and you've got to be able to communicate. So getting the communication down, that's kind of key to a lot of this stuff. And if you're working remotely, you're working from home, yeah, it's tricky because you got to work through how you're going to get that information not only into you, but out to whomever, your boss, your higher up, whatever it is. So those are things that people are working through right now. And I think a lot of what's happened this week with employment is that people are either too freaked out and they're not working, or they're going slowly because they're not used to working at home. A lot of companies already work from home. My theory on why traffic in Seattle is so light on Fridays is because that is an unofficial telecommuting day. I strongly believe that because Thursday is always terrible traffic in Seattle. And I think that's the last real workday where people commute into their offices. So a lot of things are changing. And I think a lot of people will continue to telecommute after this self-isolation period is over as well. I think you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see employers go, oh, yeah, this makes sense. And this is something that I enacted with both Summit Properties Northwest and Reynolds and Klein Appraisal in 2011. We've been virtual for 9 years. We do have office space where we shoot a lot of our videos and where this podcast is being shot. But for two companies with combined people of, 110 people, we operate with pretty slim physical office because you don't really need much in today's environment. You put everything on the internet, put everything on the cloud, reach out to people with things like podcasts, and business can be done. It's not a huge issue. So the last thing I'm going to touch on is a tweet quote that I read earlier this morning that from an investor who runs a massive fund. His name is Bill Ackman, and he runs the Pershing Fund. He's got about $8.6 billion in assets under management, and that was as of 2019. And his take is he wants to do a 1-month tax holiday spring break. And I don't normally follow a lot of stuff on Twitter. I think it's people who are self-aggrandizing, tweeting out what they think, thinking other people should listen to them. No different than a podcast and me doing this, but I do more than 140 characters on the podcast or whatever the limit is on Twitter. But so this guy is, his tweet was, Mr. President, the only answer is to shut down the country for the next 30 days and close the borders. Tell all Americans that you are putting us on an extended spring break at home with family. The moment you send everyone home for spring break and close the borders, the infection rate will plummet, the stock market will soar, and the clouds will lift. I think that is a rosy look at things, but that is more of what I am kind of thinking is just, hey, let's call this however you need to call it to slow the infection rate down. All right, so maybe everybody goes home for a month, but just call it and let's go with that and have just a steady way of doing things instead of this, well, we're not encouraging over 10 people, but you have to have less than 50 for sure. No restaurants open. All this stuff that's not on. I think there should be federal guidelines that and worldwide guidelines that if a pandemic flu, virus hits, hey, here's what we do. Somebody who's been talking about this has been Bill Gates with his Gates Foundation, and he predicted in 2016 that if a pandemic flu came along, we would not be prepared. And guess what? We are not prepared, not in any kind of way. And so the stock market will soar and the clouds will lift. Is that going to happen? Well, the economic impact is going to be with us for a long time, even with a big bailout, because so many small businesses, they're going to have a tough time recovering from this. This is one of those events where you're like, yeah, what happened then? I shut my business down to the coronavirus. Be like, okay. Yep, that makes sense. This is one of those things that's right up there with the housing crash of 2008, where Wall Street got a bailout. This time it's going to be probably small businesses in the travel industry and lots of industries that are impacted. But further kind of going with this guy's quotes, no one defaults, no one forecloses, a 30-day rent, interest, and tax holiday for all. That's what he's proposing. That makes sense to me. The shutdown is inevitable as it's already happening, but not in a controlled fashion, which is extending the economic pain and amplifying the spread of the virus. You need to rip this Band-Aid off, do it quickly, and get us through. Because at some point in time, we're going to get through this one way or the other. We always do. And will the economy be in tatters? It's certainly going to be impacted. It's already impacted right now. You can look at how far the Dow is down. And that's on an ongoing basis. But the minute you have some kind of game plan in place, people are going to start to freak out less. They're going to understand that the reaction to this virus threat is way out of proportion to the actual impact on human life. Yeah, we're seeing cases go exponentially up, but they're not killing people that aren't already sick or who aren't already teetering. It's not hammering the general American population. That's just not happening. That's not what's going on. So I believe that things will return, and when they do come back, they're going to come back screaming. Because what happens when you have a population locked down, all of a sudden you can go to the gym again. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go to the gym like twice a day, morning session, afternoon session. People are going to be excited to go to work. Hey, I actually get to be around people and be social. I don't have to be locked down with my kids and in this house, which is becoming ever smaller. You're going to have people going out to eat. It's going to be just this emergence of humanity going out to do things socially again. Because right now it's pretty eerie, especially in Washington and Seattle, to be kind of on this, you're monitoring yourself. I shouldn't really do that. I was texting just not long ago with one of my friends, hey, let's go do a hike. Let's keep, 6 feet distance, of course. And that's not going to happen. But I think on some level, a lot of us are willing to, risk that at a very small level, not go into groups of hundreds of people, but kind of do what we're doing, which is hunkering down, waiting this thing out, and then I think you will have a massive return at some point. So I look forward to that. In the meantime, I'm going to be bringing you daily podcasts until we can kind of get this sorted out and get a real game plan and keep moving forward, because that's what it's all about. So keep moving forward, heads up high. That's all you can do. All right. So again, I'm Sean Reynolds from Summit Properties Northwest and Reynolds & Klein Appraisal. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, this podcast, and also listening on all the places our podcasts are out there. So again, I'm Sean Reynolds. Thanks again for listening and watching. We'll catch you tomorrow. See you then. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.